Hello and welcome back, dear viewers. Today, as promised, we get part 2 of our story about wife's infidelity and revealing the truth. I won't keep you waiting for much longer, so let's get to it. I never stepped out on my marriage for just sex, and trust me, Dad, by the time I was in my 30s and early 40s, I was getting plenty of offers. But I loved my wife and wouldn't dare go back on my vows. I received a second chance with Naomi, Mark. Give yourself time to heal, time to grieve your marriage, and when you're ready, open your heart for someone else. There are millions of good women out there, Mark. Thanks, Dad. Love you, son. Look after yourself. Throwing myself into work helped distract me. I ended up traveling the state of South Australia, visiting various shops and suppliers, while taking the time each weekend to explore certain regions, particularly the Barossa Valley. I found my divorce made me a hard-arsed negotiator, not willing to give an inch unless there was a favorable outcome for my company. At least my bosses were happy with my performance at work, and they were already in my ear about remaining in Adelaide permanently. My daughter visited me a month after I'd moved into the apartment. Waiting for her at the airport, she cried out, "Daddy," before she ran towards me. Hugging her tightly, spinning her around, she was crying immediately, whispering how much I loved her in return, and that once it was over, I'd be home again for good. She spent a week with me, and though I was working, I spent most of the time working from home, but whenever I had a moment, we'd chat about anything that came to mind. She let me know that her mother had been inundating her with calls, trying to explain her side of the story. Though I didn't want to show her the evidence, I did have a report printed up which I finally relented and showed her. By the time she stopped reading, she was in a flood of tears and almost growled how much she hated her mother. That wasn't my intention, but despite my protestations that her mother still loved her, I had a bad feeling that it was going to take a long time for her to forgive her mother, if she ever did. The day she left hurt us both, as I know she wanted to stay with me simply to keep me company. I hugged her for what felt like hours before she needed to leave. I had barely shed a tear during those months when my marriage had fallen apart. I was angry about it, not upset. I find no shame in admitting I needed to cry in my car for a few minutes when my daughter walked away. It made me realize that I was feeling rather lonely, but her visit had also revitalized me at the same time. I spoke with her every night. My son called me at least once every couple of days. My siblings knew what happened, my little sister promising to visit as soon as she could. My father kept me up to date of anything going on. Even guys at my old office in Sydney seemed to be aware of certain things, but generally called to just shoot the shit and make me laugh. It was 6 weeks before Christmas when lightning struck again. I was walking the aisles of a nearby supermarket, bored out of my brain. Grocery shopping was something Kylie and I had always done together. We'd make each other laugh, act like fools, and it would always be an enjoyable experience. I was reaching for a bottle of salad dressing, not realizing a woman was reaching for the same bottle. Our hands collided and we both turned and stared at each other. I'm fairly sure my jaw dropped slightly as her cheeks immediately colored. "Sorry," I said. "No, my fault. I didn't see you. Please take the bottle. I can get something else." I couldn't possibly take it, it's the last one. I don't know where I found the confidence for what I said next. I tell you what, you take the bottle if you grab a coffee with me later. I had no idea who she was, her name or anything, but that touch had lit a spark in me. And on how pretty her face was alone, I wanted to get to know her. I offered my hand. "I'm Mark." She smiled as she took my hand, smiling at how soft her skin was. I'm Jennifer. Do you often pick up women in supermarkets, Mark?" "Nope, you're the first one." "And you're confident I'm single?" "If you're not, I'll retract my invitation. If you are, I'm hoping you'll say yes." She was brunette with hair down almost to her shoulders. Her bright blue eyes were shielded by a pair of thin-rimmed black glasses perched on a gorgeous little nose. Her lips were full but real, her face one of classical beauty. I had no idea about her age. I wanted to check out the rest of her but resisted, though I guessed she was 6 inches shorter than me. No idea what she thought about me in return, but the smile suggested she did like what she saw. "I'd like a coffee. Why don't you give me your number?" After giving her my number, she sent me a message. I'll be done shopping in around half an hour, then I'll really need to take this home to put away. But I can meet you in a couple of hours if you'd like. Are you local? I am. I don't live far away. You? Same. I hate traveling too far to just go grocery shopping. Let me know where you are and I'll meet you there. Pushing her trolley forward, she rested her hand on my forearm. I'll see you soon, Mark. I haven't had a coffee date in far too long. I heard the tone and met her eyes. I saw the pain as I saw the same look in my eyes whenever I looked in a mirror. I'll text you when I get home and let you know where I'll be. Zooming through the rest of my shopping, I made use of the self-service and practically raced home, throwing everything into the fridge or cupboards before I had a shower and changed. Before I left, I sent Jennifer a message asking if she liked a nearby coffee shop I'd grown to really like since moving into the local area. She messaged back within a couple of minutes, admitting she visited the same shop quite often, wondering if we hadn't seen each other before. I'll admit to some nerves as I waited for her to arrive. I'd dated my wife during our marriage, but this was my first real date in over 20 years. She walked in, having changed herself, wearing an utterly gorgeous sundress that highlighted her curves, the colorful pattern simply accentuating her womanly curves. Her bust was generous and she had a great pair of legs. Standing up to greet her, I kissed her cheek and was surprised when she briefly hugged me. Buying her a drink, it was a case of simply getting to know each other. She admitted that she simply admired my confidence in asking her out in the middle of a busy supermarket. Then she added, "But when you touched my hand, Mark, I felt something, so it wasn't just me?" She blushed but nodded. No. I often read about such things but think it's just fantasy." Offering my hand, she took it and we smiled when I closed my hand around hers. "I just felt it again," she whispered. "Definitely felt it on my end." We didn't delve into history too much, not on a first date. I learned her name, she was single, and she smiled when showing me her left hand, though it was obvious a ring had once rested on that third finger. She was a kindergarten teacher but had no children of her own. She lived in a small apartment by herself, had a few close friends. Her parents lived in the city, she had a younger sister, and that she was 35. "Oh," I said, I'm 45, I don't care how old you are, Mark. I only care about what type of man you are." When she said that, I had to admit that I was separated from my wife. Noticing the nervous look on her face, I sighed and asked if she wanted another drink, as it was going to take some explanation. I didn't want to tell her everything on our first meeting, but if that was required, she made me smile when she said, "No, Mark, I'll trust you for now. I can see you're hurting." "Is it that obvious?" I saw the same look in the mirror when he broke my heart. She held my hand again and squeezed. "It gets easier, but it's just one day at a time first. Then it's weeks and months, and soon the person that broke it no longer matters." She smiled at me again. "And then maybe you'll meet the right person who can start mending that same heart. It's just some weight more than others, but it happens eventually." My dad said the same thing. "Your father is a wise man." We finished our second drink and wandered outside. Walking to her car, it was that awkward moment, unsure whether to kiss her, hug her, or just wish her well. When I hugged her, part of me didn't want to let her go. I had no idea I'd find someone I'd be attracted to so much so quickly again. I think we were both reluctant to break the hug. "Call me during the week, Mark. I'd love to speak to you again." How about tonight?" She giggled and it was a dagger to the heart. "You can call me whenever you want." I called her that night, then every night going forward. I didn't want to get in the way of her usual week as a teacher, but I asked if she wanted to go out for dinner on Friday night. When she said she'd love to, I practically danced around my apartment once I hung up the phone. I hadn't felt that giddy in a long time. At a conference on the Thursday, more than one commented on my rather sunny disposition. Everyone was aware of my separation and impending divorce, so they immediately assumed I met someone. I didn't want to jinx anything but told them that I'd enjoyed a coffee date and that I would be having dinner with the same person the next night. I added I wasn't interested in dating around. I dated one woman at a time. If it didn't work out, then I'd try again with someone else. The restaurant I'd chosen was one which had rave reviews online, but not one I'd visited before. It was casual dining, but the food was meant to be superb. Though casual, I still went with trousers instead of jeans, a long-sleeved button-down shirt, a pair of leather shoes, and I put on a little cologne, though I kept the stubble to a minimum. The restaurant had a bar, and I smiled when Jennifer was already there waiting for me. She looked incredibly nervous. Noticing me approaching, she stood up and, without hesitation, I leaned down to kiss her. She kissed me back immediately as I pulled her into my body, feeling her hand on the back of my head. "Wow," she whispered when breaking apart, "if you're going to greet me like that on only our second date." I wanted to do it at the end of our first. A waiter approached us to take us to our seats. Thankfully, we got a small semicircular booth so we could sit side by side. After ordering drinks, we chatted away about our weeks. There was no missing how enthusiastic she was about teaching, but when she admitted to wanting children of her own, I found myself talking about my own. I think we were both annoyed when the waiter returned, asking about our order, as it disrupted the flow. We agreed to share a starter and dessert, but get a main meal each. I was amazed at how easy conversation flowed, finding myself captivated by her face, her voice, her mannerisms. Fairly sure she found me gazing more than once as she blushed each time. The food was excellent, no complaints about that, and while the waiters and waitresses were attentive, they were not too intrusive. After dinner, I paid up, though she offered to go Dutch before I asked if she wanted another drink. She accepted immediately, taking her hand and leading her towards a bar I'd been scoping out online. It was a quiet place, a man behind a piano providing background music. There were more booths, Jennifer enjoying a cocktail while I had a bourbon and mixer. "What happened, Mark?" she finally asked. I told her everything. How we'd met. Our life together. Our children. Our careers. But then I explained what happened with my father. My lack of relationship with my mother. Their divorce and what I'd learned. Then how I slowly realized my wife was doing the same thing. Then I confessed how I'd left, what I'd done the weeks before everything. I'm still married, Jennifer, but we're separated. I've moved here to ensure the divorce goes through. I'm not sure if you'll consider what I'm doing cheating or not. I won't blame you if you did. But my marriage is over. It's in name only. I will return to Sydney to make sure the divorce is granted. What if you met someone here? Then I'd talk to them about our options. My children are in Sydney. Being this far away from them is hard. I had to look away as admitting it did upset me. I miss them every day. She rested a finger on my cheek, so I looked at her. Then she kissed me and I felt better about things. Cuddling into me, she moved a hand to my chest, resting her head against my shoulder. My ex-husband was a piece of work, Mark. Swept me off my feet when I was 19. He was 25 at the time. The age difference didn't bother me, but my parents warned me about him. But I was in love and wouldn't listen to them. Didn't see the red flags that were popping up within a couple of months. I was surprised he let me go work, but that was all I was allowed to do. Slowly but surely, he isolated me from my family and my friends. I was expected to teach at school, then return home and practically be his maid and his hooer. She paused as I had a feeling in my gut that was only the start of the story. Running my hand up and down her side, she snuggled into me more. I'm guessing it got worse. He started slapping me for any sort of imagined transgression. I talked back to him, so I was disrespectful to my husband. I dressed like a slut or I was home late, so I was cheating. I spent money on something I wanted, so I was financially irresponsible. He never said anything positive, he was a sea of absolute negativity. I can't imagine wanting to say anything but nice things about you, Jennifer, I said softly. I knew I needed to escape. He was crazy and I knew one day he'd either punch me and put me in hospital or he'd just straight out kill me. I called my dad and cried on the phone, asking him to save me. He showed up with my 2 uncles and a few of his friends. My ex-husband actually tried to fight them all off, but pushing and slapping around a woman is different to fighting off men. Or man, as my father cleaned his clock with one punch, then they tied him to a chair as they helped me move out. Went to the police start away, got a restraining order and AVO against him. I've been divorced for 7 years and he doesn't know where I am. I've barely dated Mark. I was scared for so long. She lifted her eyes to look into mine. Then I met you, and I had feelings I hadn't felt in so long. I never felt them about him. She'd driven but wasn't safe to drive, so I offered to drive her home. Pulling up outside an apartment complex, I realized it was one I'd looked at before choosing my current residence. Escorting her inside, she opened the front door and hesitated. I made up her mind, pulling her close and kissing her again. I had a wonderful night, Jennifer. I would like to do it again. During the week? Any night you'd like. I'm not a bad hand in the kitchen if you'd like to join me for dinner. Let me know the night and I'll bring something too. I'm not too bad myself. She smiled as she said, well, I'll cook first, then you cook for me, and we'll compare notes. What night? Wednesday, Mark, though I expect your usual nightly call. And plenty of messages. She kissed me again. Play your cards right and you might even get a surprise or two in a message. What are you doing tomorrow? Nothing. Why don't we go to the beach? You just want to see me rocking a bikini. She paused and her eyes lit up. Though I wonder how you'd look like in a pair of small swim shorts. Just message me when you can pick me up. I kissed her again and somehow managed to drag myself to the staircase. Driving home, I heard my phone ding a couple of times, not opening it until I was inside and sat on my couch with a beer in hand. I had a wonderful night, Mark. XXJ, part of me wanted you to stay with me tonight, but I don't want to rush things. I don't want to rush things either. J, when you're here on Wednesday night, bring a change of clothes. I want you to stay, but it's too early for anything else but sleeping in the same bed, Mark. I'm tired of sleeping alone, Jennifer. J, so am I. I'm in bed now. It's a queen but it feels empty. It didn't feel like that until I met you. I'll pick you up at 9 a.m. I'm taking you for breakfast first before we go to the beach. J, what's your favorite color? M, usually blue. On a woman, either black or red. J, I have the perfect bikini for you then. See you in the morning, Mark. M, sweet dreams, beautiful. Her last message was a love heart. Pulling up outside her apartment complex the next morning, she buzzed me up, knocking on her door and hearing her call me inside. I was wearing a rather tight t-shirt and shorts. How she didn't see my erection when she walked out in her red bikini, I'm fairly sure she did. Hands on her hips, she smiled at me. What do you think? You have a broom? I'm going to need to fight all the men off. Her smile broadened before she disappeared, returning in a t-shirt and shorts. Grabbing a bag, I placed that in the boot of my car next to mine and I drove her to a beachside cafe for a simple but filling breakfast. The beach was filling up by the time we were ready to take in some sun. Asking me to apply cream to her, she wasn't particularly tanned, admitting she liked being in the sun but wasn't interested in bronzed skin. She moaned more than once as I rubbed it in, enjoying the color on her cheeks as I rubbed more onto her back. Jennifer, are you suggesting you enjoyed this? I whispered into her ear. You've got strong hands, Mark, and it felt very nice. She returned the favor, her soft hands moving across my back, her chin eventually resting on my chest, her breasts pressing into my back as she hugged me. I turned to kiss her, and she rather quickly ended up lying underneath me. I eventually broke the kiss as there were families around us, resting on my own towel as she resumed lying on her front. Her eyes were covered by sunglasses, but there was no missing her smile. We spent all day at the beach, running down to the water a couple of times. Wrapping her legs around me again, we made out again, and she wouldn't have missed the fact I was hard as steel, enjoying the gasp she made when she rubbed herself against it. Biting her bottom lip, she kissed me again, my clock throbbing when she released a whimper I recognized. She was horny and needed something more. Thankfully, she gave me time to recover so my erection disappeared before we stepped out of the water. Applying more cream, we hung around until later afternoon as the sun slowly started to set, putting on our t-shirts as the weather cooled. Packing up and taking her hand, she snuggled into my side as we walked back to my car. Pulling up outside her apartment, I helped carry her bag upstairs. Would you like to stay for a drink? I'd love to, but if I do, I won't want to leave. She walked towards me and kissed me. Go home and get a change of clothes, she whispered. Come back for a drink and stay the night. I'm fairly sure I broke a dozen traffic laws as I drove home, raced inside and dumped my stuff, quickly packed a bag, grabbed any essentials, and raced back to her place. When I knocked on the door, out of breath, she opened it and laughed at me as I was busy catching my breath. Grabbing the front of my t-shirt, she dragged me inside, kicked the door shut, then pushed me back onto the couch. Straddling my lap, she was on me immediately, helping take off her t-shirt as she was soon rubbing herself against me. Duck, I grunted. Be good to me, as she whispered. I don't want to rush this, Mark. I can't do that again. Take as long as you need, Jennifer. Call me Jenny. With an I, not a Y. We both got hot and bothered before she reluctantly pulled away, disappearing to put on a pair of pajamas. I smiled as she was quite obviously embarrassed, snuggling into my side as we enjoyed a couple of drinks, watching a bit of television, though continued to chat about anything that came to mind. It wasn't particularly late when she stood up and led me to her bedroom. There was some art on the walls, and a lot of teddy bears on top of a chest of drawers. Well, I know what to surprise you with now. I love flowers too. And chocolate. Sliding under the sheets, she spooned back against me. Within a couple of minutes, I could feel her shaking. Asking her to roll over, she snuggled into me as I cuddled her. She was asleep a couple of minutes later. I remained awake for a little longer as I watched her sleep. She looked so peaceful but also so beautiful. I knew how incredibly lucky I was to have someone like her in my life. She made me breakfast the next morning and we spent all day just lazing around her apartment. Any silences were comfortable, filling those times with lots of cuddling and making out. We were teasing each other all the time, but I was willing to wait for her. When she straddled me the last time before I left for the evening, I think she almost gave in to temptation before I gently told her to stop. Don't rush, Jenny, I whispered. We've got all the time in the world. I knew I was in love with her already, and I had a feeling she was feeling the same way. The only problem I had is that I hoped it wasn't a rebound thing. I'd only just recently left my wife of 20 years and had fallen for the first woman who came along. But I like to think it was fate that brought us together. There was a reason why we were in the supermarket that day. We didn't message constantly throughout the day, considering she was busy teaching, but we talked every night. The guys at work knew I was now dating someone, while I did fill in the family back in Sydney that I'd met someone special. My father called and kept me up to date with Kylie. Apparently she was on the verge of moving out. She was still trying to find me, but no one was telling her a thing. She thought I was still in Sydney, so was hoping she'd run into me eventually. Wednesday night couldn't come quickly enough. Jennifer cooked a slap-up meal that was tasty and filling, but blew me out of the water with the dessert she'd prepared for us. Patting my stomach once we'd finished, I said, "They often say the way to a man's heart is through his stomach." Jennifer smirked at me. I was always told to keep a man's belly full and his balls empty to keep him happy. I almost spat my coffee all over the table, coughing a couple of times, while she giggled at my reaction. Meeting her eyes, I retorted, "What about a woman, Jenny? The moment you make me the first time, Mark, I'm yours forever." It was the first time our conversation had turned in any way sexual. We behaved until that moment. Moving my chair closer, I placed a hand on her bare thigh, as she wearing a dress. She gazed into my eyes with a look that wondered what I'd do next. Slowly moving up her thigh, I felt her spread her legs slightly. I teased her until I brushed my fingers against her panties, smiling as I felt how damp they already were. "Are we only sleeping together tonight, Jenny?" I asked softly. No, we're not, Mark." We cleaned up everything together before she dragged me to the bedroom. Slowly undressing each other, we didn't stop until we were both naked. Her breads were wonderful, judging them at around a C-cup. I'd already checked out her arse in her bikini while she kept her kitty nice and trimmed. As for me, I kept my own area trimmed, but she glanced down and looked back at me with a smile. I knew you were generously proportioned, Mark. One thing I never heard from her was complaints. We made love that night. Not only that, she happily blew me after I'd laid her down and used my mouth on her. Made her orgasm more than a few times. She swallowed the very first time and I fell in love with her even more. Kylie had long ago stopped doing that. In fact, brow jobs had been few and far between for a long time. When it came to making love, Jennifer was an active participant, and anything I thought about Kylie evaporated as I realized that sex with Jennifer was perfect. When she OD'd while we made love, she couldn't hold back her emotions any longer. Waking the next morning, I was on my back as she cuddled into my side, arm across my chest with her leg bent and resting over my legs. She woke up and kissed my cheek. I love you, she whispered. Turning to kiss her, I couldn't help smile. I love you too, I whispered back. Not too soon. No such thing, Jenny. If that's how we feel about each other, then that's how we feel. I felt at that first coffee date. I knew I'd met the man I want to spend the rest of my life with. She took my hand and kissed me again. I mean that in the sense that, if you want to be closer to your children, I'll go with you. Are you sure? That's a big decision. There's nothing keeping me here, Mark. My parents are still fit and healthy. My sister is happily married. I won't leap into the decision now, but my heart says to go with you. I'd love to meet your children. They'll be here for Christmas. Then you're all coming to enjoy Christmas with my family. She visited my apartment for the first time that evening. She called it a bit of a bachelor pad, but it was clean and tidy, though understood why I kept it simple, as it was only a temporary place I'd be living. After cooking her dinner, hearing her make sounds while eating that she'd made the previous night in bed, I knew I'd impressed her with my culinary skills, earned a blowjob in thanks, sinking to her knees in the kitchen. When she'd swallowed my load again, she promised me that she'd never stop doing that for me. Using sex as a weapon is what led to so many problems in marriages. When she mentioned marriage, she blushed and turned away. Gently taking her wrist, I admitted I was already thinking about it too. Jenny, I can't remember the last time I felt this amount of love for Kylie. I'm not saying that because she broke my heart and cheated. Maybe we've been going through the motions for the years. Maybe it's because this is new. Maybe it's simply because I'm older with more life experience. But I absolutely ducking love you, Jennifer Morris. And one day soon, I want to be Jennifer Williams, she whispered in reply. Life was bliss for the next few weeks. We were never apart a single night, admittedly spending more nights at her apartment rather than mine, as hers was a far more pleasant place to be. She spoke to my father more than once on the phone, while I kept my children up to date, but they didn't want to speak until they'd met her in person first. Calling my son a week before Christmas, I had to ask about his mother and what she was doing. I've told her that I won't be around for Christmas. I think she's figured out that you're not in Sydney. Lottie hates her dad. I mean pure hatred. She's talked to her once since you left and pretty much went no contact with her after that call. I talked to your sister last night. She'll be here in a couple of days. What about Granddad and Naomi? I'll catch up with them when I'm back in Sydney. Jenny is more than likely going to come with me. We'll just need to find her a job and buy a place as close as possible so she doesn't have to commute. Sure you don't want to stay there, Dad? Lottie and I have been talking and we're both considering moving there to be closer to you. I know your sister is also thinking about it. Jennifer was listening in and took my hand, giving it a squeeze. Are you sure, Steve? You'll be leaving behind all your friends and family. You're more important, Dad. Trust me, when Lottie gets there in a couple of days, she's going to mention it. And her husband is all for it too. He hates living in Sydney nowadays. I glanced at Jennifer, unable to hide my surprise. I'll still need to return to ensure the divorce goes through. Don't make any hasty decisions, Steve. I'm more than aware of that, Dad. Far as I'm concerned, duck her. She's still trying to convince people she didn't do anything wrong and that you're at fault for walking away. Jennifer came with me to the airport the day my daughter arrived. She'd brought along her husband, Tom, but as soon as Charlotte saw me, she dropped her things and ran towards me. It was like the days I'd collect her from school and she'd be ever so excited to see me. She cried again for a few minutes, and when I introduced her to Jennifer, both of them were soon in floods of tears. I shared a glance with Tom and shrugged helplessly. My son surprised me the next day by knocking on my apartment door. "Dad," he exclaimed before we embraced. Bastard got me good, both of us needing to wipe our cheeks as I led him inside to introduce him to Jennifer. "Well, he looks just like you at least," she stated. I knew what she meant, but I'd already had DNA tests done. Kylie hadn't been cheating on me that early in our relationship, but I still needed that reassurance. On the morning of Christmas Day, Jennifer woke up in my arms, whispering into my ear if I wanted a brow job. I replied I'd accept that if I could return the favor. Someone knocked on the door. "Stop fooling around, Daddy." Jennifer cuddled me tighter, clearly embarrassed. I couldn't stop chuckling. "I'm making breakfast, then we need to go to Jennifer's parents' place." "We'll be out in a minute, sweetheart." I thought she was gone before I heard her say, "I'm glad you're happy and with someone you love, Daddy." "Thank you, sweetheart." I drove the five of us to Jennifer's parents later that morning. The boot was full of presents, carrying them all in. Her mother fell in love with my daughter within 2 minutes, while I'm fairly sure my son was adopted as one of their own grandchildren, as much as they adopted me as their son. I called my father over an online video service so we could exchange Christmas cheer. My brother, his wife, my sister and her husband, plus their kids were sharing Christmas with him. Kylie had long since left our former home and moved in with her parents. The news that did surprise me is that her affair partner had been kicked out of the house by his wife, who had used the evidence to ensure he was sacked for gross misconduct. Apparently, my wife held onto her job by the skin of her teeth, but had found herself demoted from her management position, and she'd lost quite a few mutual friends who couldn't forgive her for cheating on me. It was a wonderful day, my children taking plenty of photos for their social media accounts. I'd long since lost interest in anything like that, considering it a waste of time, but I was soon receiving messages from a few old friends who got in contact with my father, asking if he knew my number. Plenty of people were curious as to what happened, so I kept my replies simple. Others gave me information about Kylie, though I told them it simply didn't matter. As soon as 12 months was up, I'd apply for a divorce and only return to Sydney to make sure it was enforced. Christmas Day with Jennifer and her family was fantastic. When she mentioned the idea that she'd come to Sydney with me, I let her know about the idea that we'd stay in Adelaide and some of my family would join us instead. Her face lit up, and I made her almost cry when I finally gave her the present I wanted. It was too early to propose, considering I was still technically married, so I bought her a gorgeous necklace and bracelet combination. She put them on straight away and whispered that she'd wear them as often as she could. After we'd finished eating a large lunch, her father offered me a beer, and we ended up in his garage where he had an old sports car up off its wheels. I haven't seen Jenny this happy in a long time, Mark. Part of me thinks getting out of Adelaide would do her the world of good. But would you be happy to remain here permanently? I'd stay here for her, and my kids will both move here to be closer. How long until your divorce can be completed? A few months at most. I've been honest with Jenny about everything from the start. I understand she was doing you dirty? Yep. Maybe up to 6 months, though I only had concrete evidence in the last few weeks before I pulled the pin. He shook his head. Damn, I've read about all this cheating nonsense. Why bother getting married if you can't keep your legs closed or your deck in your pants? Ever heard of cuckolding? The disgusted look on his face suggested he knew exactly what it was. Yeah. I'm not sure that's what Kylie intended, but it's one of these new bullshit things going on. Same with all these poly people and wanting open relationships so they can cheat while keeping their conscience clear. Frankly, my wife asked any of that of me, well, I'd end up in jail afterwards. The amount of disrespect even asking that of someone. Jenny's ex-husband was both cheating and abusing her, eh? What? He rested a hand on my shoulder. As she barely knew about the cheating because it was the abuse she needed to escape from. But he was ducking anything with tits and account. She just doesn't bother mentioning it because the abuse was what she was dealing with daily. He squeezed my shoulder. She loves you, Mark. Just don't break her heart. Please, I'm not sure I can handle another call like that from my little girl. He sipped at his bottle, looking away as he added quietly, I nearly killed him, Mark. He hurt my little girl. The only person who stopped me killing him was her. She didn't want to see her father behind bars. I love her more than anything, Dad. He grinned as he already called me son. I've been hurt badly myself, so we're both carrying wounds on our hearts and souls. We're helping mend each other. We stayed until it was rather late, my daughter driving us home as I'd had too much to drink. Arriving back at my apartment, my kids headed off to bed as Jennifer dragged me to our bedroom. Pushing me back onto the bed, she pulled down my shorts and underwear, dropped her panties, then climbed on to ride my clock. Best way to finish Christmas, she moaned. If that was good, she enjoyed New Year's Eve even more. I told my kids to amuse themselves as I escorted her to a city center hotel. After dinner and drinks, I escorted her back to our room, where a bottle of champagne was chilling, along with some snacks. But she knew what we were there for, helping her out of her dress, enjoying the lingerie she was wearing. We made love all night, timing our mutual climaxes almost to the moment the clock struck midnight. It was a couple of hours later that we finally stopped, Jennifer cuddling into me as always. Any wishes for the new year? I wondered. More than one. Want to hear them? Of course. I want you to live here with me. Done. I want you to propose to me once your divorce is granted. I'm already looking at rings. She cuddled me tighter. I want a baby, she whispered. Stop taking your pills as soon as we're ready. She looked at me in surprise. I couldn't resist smiling. Jennifer, we're going to get married and we're going to have a family together. I'll throw them out the morning we agree to start trying, though I'll need to speak to my doctor about it. I'll let you know when I'm fertile. My children departed a couple of days later. I hated to see them go, but once I explained that I would likely remain in Adelaide if they were to join me, they promised to start looking at their options. I called my father and told him the same thing. He told me to make the best choice for myself, but he was happy where he was with Naomi, but he'd certainly come and visit me when he could. The next few months were blissful. I eventually handed in my notice for my apartment and moved in with Jennifer. I won't say it was one of those fairy tale romance, it was real life after all, but I couldn't remember being happier. We were a real team in regards to anything in our lives. She knew the specter of my divorce loomed on the horizon and was still on my mind at times. We still both had trust issues, but we agreed to always talk about any problems we had. Not that either of us gave the other a reason to think we were doing anything untoward. Our sex life was wonderful and we never stopped dating. We did nearly everything together and I simply couldn't get enough of her. Just basking in her presence made me feel better. She made me want to be a better man, the perfect man in her eyes. As for Jennifer, she showed me so much love. I'd already bought an engagement ring by the time I was ready to return to Sydney. She was more nervous than I was during the flight because she knew there were still potential banana skins. My father greeted us at the airport with my siblings and my kids. We would be staying with my father while the divorce was sorted out. I'd already filed the paperwork, but I had already been told by my lawyer that Kylie was trying to contest the divorce. Sitting in his office with Jennifer, I was flabbergasted that she'd even try and stop it. I haven't seen her in 12 months, I stated. I've followed it to the letter of the law. I can even prove I've lived in Adelaide for the past year and she hasn't lived with me in that time. In fact, we've had no communication at all. While that is true, she's still allowed to contest it, he replied. No judge will actually listen to her reasons and no counseling will be forced. I'm assuming Jennifer is your partner? Kylie cheating on me is the original reason. I now have a better reason to divorce her. As soon as we're divorced, I'll be proposing to Jenny and we'll be getting married as quickly as possible. We're trying for children once the divorce is granted, Jennifer added. I threw out my pills a few weeks ago. I'm hoping the celebration sex we have when he gets his divorce will lead to my pregnancy. Okay, I'll speak to her lawyer and see what she wants. I mean, there's not actually a lot she can do, but a smart lawyer could fight this. Staying with our father didn't curtail our sexual relationship. In fact, my father was a randy old bugger. He might have been nearing 70, Naomi 5 years younger than he was, but I'm fairly sure I heard the pair making love at least one evening. Jennifer simply stated it was rather sweet that they were still so attracted to each other. I cuddled her and agreed. Then we made love too. 3 days later, I heard from my lawyer. Kylie would sign her name to the divorce agreement, so it was a joint application and therefore would proceed without delay if I agreed to just speak to her a final time. I discussed it with Jennifer, who supported me no matter what I chose. My lawyer suggested I just speak to her so everything was sorted out. My father actually agreed. That's it for part 2, folks. Make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the satisfying conclusion to our gripping tale. Be safe, and I'll see you in the next video.